Hello everyone, this is Lala, and today I am making the video that will discuss all of the Challenger men from all four eras who did at least 3 seasons. So I'm combining the videos that I did of the Era 1 men, the Era 2 men, the Era 3 men, and the Era 4 men into one video. So I'm working on this concurrently with the Women Challenges video as well. And just like over there, I'm going to abridge my descriptions for each person since there's like 70 people on this list, and going over a quick summary regarding their challenge experience and stats will cause this to be a decently timed video. So this is covering up until Battle of the Era. So no, I'm not including All Stars 5 in this ranking. So now that I have that covered, I'm going to go over the criteria that I am using for this ranking. So the first criteria is competition. So this includes dailies, eliminations, and final performances. So the more early boots someone has, the lower they'll be on the lists. You need to make it to the final. You need to win finals, and you need to make it to the end game / close to the final several times, which will cause you to be higher. I don't really count team challenges, or at least I'm not going to describe that in the descriptions for this video. You'll be lower if you have a bad elimination record. The more finals lost, the more finals missed, and the more seasons that you've done without getting close to a final, you will be lower on the list. Pretty self-explanatory. So the second category that I'm considering is longevity. So this refers to the amount of seasons someone competed in, the wide bracket of years that they competed in as well. So the less seasons someone did, the lower they'll be on the list. The more seasons, the more seasons that someone's done in a several year bracket and them having success in that, they'll be higher on the lists. If you've only done seasons within a few years, you'll probably be lower on the list. So all that kind of just is my explanation. So the next criteria that I am considering are eras and formats. So if you compete on seasons with no eliminations, you'll be lower on the list. Success on duo or individual seasons will be higher on the list. Success on modern seasons, you'll be higher on the list. Seasons that have vote-offs or everyone goes to the finals will be lower on the list. And seasons with team seasons, especially those that have barely any eliminations, will be lower on the list. And the final category that I am looking into is politics. So this involves the alliances that people are in during the seasons, the moves that they made, and avoiding eliminations due to politics, since it shows that they're actively working to not put themselves in danger. 73rd is Jon Brennan. So the first season wasn't competitive at all due to the janky format of no one going home. He was partnered with Beth on Battle of the Seasons 1, and they were booted second. On his third and final season, The Inferno 2, he was booted first, and he might have sent himself home. So he only did 3 seasons over 2 decades ago, and flopped during the dated and easiest era format-wise. At 72nd is Vinny Fotti. So he was partnered with Sarah on Fresh Meats 2, but they didn't have the numbers, losing second to Kenny and Laura. He was eliminated third in Cutthroat due to being seen as a weaker player. He got himself and Sarah DQ'd on Battle of the XS1, despite them winning that daily, and he actually had a chance to do well in the season. So he was booted very early on each season he did, and he ruined the only chance that he had in making it far. At 71st is Tyrie Ballard, so I'm not going to waste much time on this. He has never won an elimination, despite being on many seasons. The furthest he made it on was the island, which was only halfway through the season, and he had a chance of making it that far on the Gauntlet 3, but he quit. And he was booted on several seasons, like the Inferno 3, Rivals 1, Rivals 2, and All Stars 4. Luckily, he had a few seasons where he was like booted 4th or whatever, unlike the other two, so here he is. At 70th is Nam Vo. I think he's the only challenger who has done 3 seasons and has literally only been DQ'd. Nam made it relatively deep-ish on Double Agents. Who knows how far he could have made it on without the back injury. He was on the following 2 seasons, barely, where he was immediately DQ'd on both, where it was due to COVID for Spice Lice and Allies, and his partner quitting on Ride or Dies. There's nothing to discuss here. At 69th is Teck Holmes. I don't know how much, if any, weight to the first 4 seasons to really factor in this. Oh, wait, none. He did All-Stars 1 after not doing the show for over 2 decades and was taken out by Nehemiah due to calling him out relatively early on in the season. Teck did make it to the final on All-Stars 2, though there are some jankiness there, especially with how they handled that quit, or the DQ with Cohutta, where he would have faced Nehemiah again, and he was a part of the Kingdom's Palace. So, a janky season in format for one of them, a good season with jankiness to it, and then a bad season, hence him being here. At 68th is Thomas Buell. I really struggle to think of anything he did on the show. He was the first out with his partner Haley on Battle of the Exes 2, after losing in elimination and in exile. On Battle of the Bloodlines, he did win an elimination, so I give him props for that, and was on the winning team, though I don't know how much that really affected him, but he was sent home mid-season due to the whole affair coming out. On his final season, he quit during the third round of Rivals 3 after Corey, his real-world friend, threw him in. So he did 3 seasons and never got close to the end game, much less the final. At 67th is Danny Jamieson. He is one of the people who did several seasons but never won an elimination, and that's why he's often seen as the worst. There have been many seasons where he was the first boot, i.e. Fresh Meat 1, or an early boot, i.e. Inferno 3 and Battle of the Seasons 2, and he's always expendable to the cast, whether they are allies or not allies. The only reason why he isn't lower is due to being booted right before the final and making it to the endgame on the Gauntlet 3. He also has never made it to a final despite doing 6 seasons. At 66th is Davis Mallory. I'm not going to say much about him because, to be honest, there isn't much to say. His best season is Inferno 1, where he did win an elimination, though it was against Danny, and lost right before the final. His following 2 seasons really weren't good though, else he was booted early on the Duel 2 and Rivals 1, and wasn't strong politically either. He only did 3 seasons over a decade ago and never made it to a final. At 65th is Dan Renzi. So the main thing that bites him in the butt here is the format/era he competed in. They were all team seasons where on one of them, no one went home. The second one had barely any people going home, and the third one had vote outs. And on Battle of the Sexes 1, he was voted out twice, roughly midway. And I will say that he almost made it to the final on the Inferno 2. I don't hold much weight to the first 4 seasons, and he never made it to the final after that, while competing in a dated era. At 64th is David Burns. He is another person that suffered from the era/format he competed on. David competed on the Challenge 2000, which really holds no weight, and then did 2 seasons after that in the Inferno 1 and the Gauntlet 3. Looking at those seasons, he really wasn't notable in the challenges and did not do much politically. Unlike the others, though, he did make it to the final on the Gauntlet 2 and made it to the end game on another season, i.e. the Inferno 1, so he wasn't an early boot on those seasons. Just from his lack of individual accomplishments and competing in a dated format and a dated era, here he is. At 63rd is Syrus Yarborough. Syrus has always been a mixed bag based on his OG run, as he is booted early-ish and mid-game on some of them, though he did make it to the final on the Inferno 1, where he won a Life Shielder, and that's arguably his only impressive season, and I'm not including him being on Extreme Challenge. But he's mainly this low due to his All-Stars run, where his earliest boots came from this era, overall, dropping his stock heavily and showing that some OGs just can't adapt to more modern formats. So Cyrus kind of fits that. At 62nd is Eric Nies. So he is another person who suffers from the formats that they played in. On one of his seasons, i.e. World Food All-Stars, there was no competition whatsoever, and he only did the Battle of the Sexes seasons, where there were no eliminations and they were all vote outs. So he didn't even compete in the normal team format of an Era 1 or an Era 2. Eric did fine in the Battle of the Sexes format, where he did win one of the seasons and made it deep-ish on the other, but they are very dated formats, even compared to the seasons back in that day, and his lack of individual sets really has him here. And at 61st is Stephen Bear. He is higher on the list compared to some of the others because he competed in a more competitive era, i.e. Era 4, and won a few eliminations during his short career, but his stats really aren't good when you look outside of that. He is very poor politically, even when in an advantageous situation like World of Worlds 1, and he has never made it close to the end game, though he was never really in early boots either, and his closest was World of Worlds 1. He also only did 3 seasons and just really doesn't deserve to be this high or higher on the list, based on his lack of good stats. At 60th is Brandon Nelson. Honestly, I might switch him with Bear, but it's really a coin flip with that. But he's another person who has never made it close to the endgame. His first lasting season was Cutthroat, where he won elimination wins this season, and it was the only season where he won any elimination wins, and on All Stars, where he only lasted half of the episodes on those seasons anyways. So he was booted earlier than that on all of the other seasons that he did, and he was out first on Battle of the Eras. He's not good at politics, not really good competitively either, but was given many chances to do better. And I guess he's not as self-destructive as Bear, which might be why I have him as higher, but yeah. At 59th, I have Ryan Knight. Okay, he did okay on Battle of the Seasons 2, where he made it around, I think a bit past the midway point of the season. But despite being in the majority alliance, his team was just very weak, hence them getting booted when they were booted. He made it to the end game on Rivals 2 as a layup team because all the men and the women saw them as weak and they were an easy elimination boot, which ended up being happened. Or it took place. And then on his final season, Battle of the X's 2, he went home very early on in the season due to getting classed and was sent home on the 4th elimination round. So, in general, has one decent season and 2 not good seasons, and he didn't really do much notable during his short career. At 58th is Preston Robertson-Charles. So he went kind of early on Battle of the Seasons 2 because his team was weak, even though they were in the majority alliance. He was brought to the endgame of Rivals 2 as a layup, and that was proven to be correct when he was booted right before the final. He made it roughly midway through free agents and was better competitively there, but still nowhere close to getting to the end game here. Overall, just nothing really impressive about his short career, and he never made it to the final. And I think he only won one elimination, if I'm remembering correctly, but his elimination record really isn't something to brag about, just from my memory. At 57th is Dario Medrano. He is someone who has been on many seasons at this point and hasn't really done anything impressive in any of them. He went early on a Battle of the Bloodlines due to pissing off the veterans and screwing up the elimination for his brother, where his brother was on his way to winning that for them. Rivals 3 was easily his best season with winning an elimination, but he essentially fought to be a layup for Bananas and Vince instead of joining the underdogs where he could have had a chance to win, but he got booted right before the final on that season. He went mid-season on Invasion of the Champion and lasted relatively deep on 30-30, but both seasons really weren't notable for him. He does have a really poor elimination record and never made it to the final, hence his placement here. At 56 is Dustin Zito. I could really be argued into putting him lower on the list. He was taken out early on Battle of the XS1 due to an injury, and who knows how long he would have lasted otherwise on that season. And it's really only this high on the list due to Battle of the Seasons 2, which he got runner-up with Trishelle and had to fight to make it to the end, though you can make the argument that he thrived on a weaker cast. His following season's Free Agent and Battle of the XS2 had him being one of the first 2 out and were really poor showings for him. Only one good season to his name, and you can only get so far, and it does so much, only having one good season out of 4. At 55th is Adam Knight. So the main reason why he's this high is because he made it to a final, though it was on the team season The Gauntlet 3, and it was very imbalanced in that team's favor. He had a decent amount of early out on some of the seasons, to be honest, just from my memory. I know. Obviously, he was DQ'd from the Duel 2, he was booted early on Battle of the Sexes 2, he didn't really do well on the ruins either, just from my memory, and the Gauntlet 2 wasn't a good showing of his as well. And he had a few middling ones as well, but he won a few eliminations and that helped bump him up a bit. Rivals 1 is arguably his best season, as he and CT won several dailies and an elimination that might have been thrown to them to be cut right before the final. He has some merit compared to the others below him, but he's still a weaker player in my opinion. At 54th is Laterrian Wallace. So he was on one of the first 4 seasons, which obviously doesn't hold much weight in my opinion, and he didn't have strong performances on Battle of the X's 1 or the Battle of the Sexes 1 or the Gauntlet 1, though he made it pretty deep on the latter. It would not be until All-Stars where he somewhat made a name for himself, where he won a few eliminations, though the people weren't the most impressive and they were all physical, and he made it to the endgame in both All-Stars 1 and All-Stars 2, though not getting to the final, though was eliminated really early on All-Stars 3. The spin-off kind of helped him since he played on a few modern seasons, but he still never made it to a final overall. At 53rd is Ace Amerson. So he has done 6 seasons overall and has done poorly in 4 of them. 3 of them had him being one of the first 2 out, with the Inferno 1, Battle of the Sexes 2, and All-Stars 1. And Gauntlet 2 was a meh-ish season. Despite that, he did make it to 2 finals, more than anyone on the list so far, and was on a team season with one of them, and the other one was more individual. But I only think All-Stars 4 was impressive out of those 2. Even outside of that, his elimination record is really poor, so I don't see him saving himself if he's ever in an elimination. At 52nd is Ryan Kehoe. So a lot of people probably expected him to be a lot lower on the list, but he won a decent amount of eliminations throughout his time on the show, and he's made it relatively far on a decent amount of the seasons that he competed in, so that's more than what the others have. I remember him he made his only final on the island. He lasted a while on Gauntlet 3, Freshmeat 2, and All-Stars 4. At the same time, he has never been much of a competitor, which we saw in the dailies, and he was always expendable, and was always seen, and for the most part kind of was, a weaker player. He also went early on a decent amount of seasons, and just from the top of my memory, that was All-Stars 2, Freshmeat 1, and The Duel 2. So I would say overall he's below average compared to the ones above him, but he's better than the ones below him. At 51st is Chet Cannon. So he was obviously going to be relatively lower for a few reasons. One is that he only did 4 seasons, and he was the first boot in half of those seasons. Even in his peak, he wasn't a top tier or an above average competitor, though he had some decent showings. He was DQ'd on Cutthroat mid-season, though he was very well insulated on the team, and he actually did have a genuinely good showing on Battle of the Seasons 2, winning a few eliminations and dailies, and making it to his only final. If he was more consistent with his seasons, he would have been higher, but it's just a bit below average overall. At 50th is Jay Starrett. He's similar to the last few people below him and the next few people above him, who has some poor seasons and either one really strong showing or a few decent showings. He got the rookie treatment on Total Madness, winning 2 eliminations before being booted 3rd, so it's still an early boot there for him. We see a pattern within the next 2 seasons where he seems to be decently positioned, but poor politics caused him to get booted early-ish and then not being the strongest in eliminations, where he will never win an elimination again post-Total Madness, which we saw on Double Agent and Ride or Dies. Battle for a New Champion was obviously a very strong season for him all the way around, but he still could not pull it out at the end, losing in elimination in the beginning of the final, and his personality/politics doesn't seem to improve at all, so I doubt he'll have a better season than that. At 49th is Josh Martinez. A part of me is shocked that he's this high on the list, since he's done like 6 or 7 seasons at this point and has never made it to the final, but unlike most of the others below him, he has never really been booted early outside of his first season and almost always makes it deep into a season. Josh manages to be in a decent enough spot politically in most of his seasons, which causes him to make it to the end game on most of those seasons, but his abhorrently poor elimination record causes him to lose focus whenever he is down, hence him never making it to the final. It does seem like he makes the same mistakes over and over again with his volatility and sometimes rash decisions throughout. So, despite him getting in better shape, physically, it doesn't really translate when it comes time to prove himself. At 48th is Eric Banks. He is someone who's very known for his feelings, not being the best politically, but not the worst either, and has absolutely no endurance. Obviously, he got at 3, but even saw this on All-Stars 1, where he was a lot thinner. He can win an elimination here and there, hence his record being split in half, though a lot of them were weight-based. Outside of being middle of the road at best in the politics and not being a well-versed competitor, it causes me to have him in the lower but not last quarter part of the rankings, as it's really just the same story with his strengths and weaknesses, where he literally gave up on Battle of the Seasons 2 as well, which does not help him. At 47th is Cohutta Grindstaff. A part of me is shocked that he is this high, since he never made it to the end game of a season, and I might consider putting him lower the further I get from this. I think it's because he has a lot of mid-season boots, which we saw in the Island, the Ruins, and All-Stars 2. Though I think All-Stars 2 was a bit past the midway point, and that might be the case with the Ruins 2, and even his best season free agents had him just missing the end game there. He could win his fair share of eliminations, and he did get screwed from All-Stars 2, even with his early boot in Battle of the Bloodlines was due to the dumb format change. At the same time, he is never in the main alliance, and that is an issue, which shows his issue in politics. I think the only case is All-Stars 2, if I'm remembering correctly. At 46 is Derek Chavez. So I mentioned in the Era 2 mention video that I'm not fully buying his stock yet. He's done 6 seasons and has had 3 poor seasons, i.e. Cutthroat, Rivals 2, and All-Stars 2, and 3 good seasons in the Battle of the Seasons 2, All-Stars 4, and Battle of the Eras. And this is the era where a lot of people with mixed records like this are going to be appearing on this list. Just from looking at his record, he will do well if he stays out of his elimination, hence his 3 good seasons, but his elimination record is still really poor, so his chances of going home once he's in an elimination is very high. But his stock is rising and is actualizing more potential, so I could see him either rising or stabilizing a bit depending on his future seasons, and it'll be interesting to see where he places on 41. At 45th is Steve Meinke. He did 1 flagship season, the Gauntlet 1, where he was a mid-season boot. All-Stars caused him to come back for the second season after 2 decades. He helped make the move to take out Derek, only to be booted right afterwards, early-ish, or in the early mid portion of the season. All-Stars 4 had him winning several eliminations to get to the end and got 3rd place, but he was in all those eliminations due to being in the bottom group many times. It'll be interesting to see where he places once All-Stars 5 completes. At 44th is Ty Ruff. Ty is someone who I think perfectly describes an average challenger. He was booted kind of early on Cutthroat after everyone expecting him to be a beast, and he had an even earlier boot on Rivals 1. Battle of the Exes 1 is easily his best season as he won 3 eliminations and getting 3rd overall in the season by getting to the final. His final season, Rivals 2, was a meh season, as while he did make it to the end game, it was mainly because Zach DQ'd in an early elimination against he and Leroy. At 43rd is Johnny Riley. He only did 3 seasons in like a 1.5-year time frame, so there isn't much to go off of. He had a good season in Free Agents where he never went into elimination, held his own in the dailies, and getting 2nd overall while getting close to some of the power players on the season. Battle of the Exes 2 was a mediocre, or I think mixed is a better term, as he won 2 eliminations, but was in 2 of those 3 eliminations due to he and his partner getting last in those dailies, and being booted mid-season there. And his poor performance in the dailies, mainly due to his partner, caused him to be in the first 2 eliminations on Rivals 3, where he was eliminated 2nd. At 42nd is Dan Setzler. So he's relatively high for someone who only did 3 seasons in the earliest and the jankiest as well as the weakest era of the show. He performed well on the Challenge 2000, though I don't put much weight into that season, and he had very strong showings on Battle of the Seasons 1 and Battle of the Sexes 2, making it to the end on both seasons and winning Battle of the Sexes 2. Ultimately, he never did a season with actual eliminations, and his run is over 20 years ago at this point, so there's obviously a ceiling as to how high I could put him. Just missing the top 40 at 41st is Jamie Murray. What I said about Dan essentially fits him too, as he competed on Extreme Challenge. As I mentioned several times, I don't hold much weight with the first 4 seasons. He had a very strong showing on Battle of the Sexes 1, where he won that, and also had a good enough janky continent too. Though he really shouldn't have been on that team due to him not being a rookie. He won all the seasons he did, but one is janky, the other one had a bad format, and he hasn't competed in 20 years, while playing in a much easier era and never playing in a more modern season, though Gauntlet 2 is closer to a modern season than any season Dan did, hence him being higher than Dan. At 40th, I have Tony Raines. I'm honestly shocked that he's this high on the list, but I think he benefits from playing in a more competitive era than the last few people below him. His first 3 seasons were nothing good to talk about, where he got DQ'd on his first 2 seasons, which were Battle of the Bloodlines and Rivals 3, and he genuinely got booted early on Invasion of the Champions, but things started turning around for him on Dirty 30, where he was purged right before the final, but he would have been an early boot again without the janky redemption twist on that season. Vendettas was the strongest season where he had a lot of control, and was the only season he made it to the final on, and Final Reckoning was a good season despite him having his back against the wall. Unfortunately, his comeback on All-Stars 4, which was an early quit, and an early/controversial one on Battle of the Eras, was disappointing to say the least, and it brought his stock down yet again. At 39th is Tyler Duckworth. Interestingly enough, I do think that he followed the same trajectory that Tony did, but in different eras. His first 2 seasons were outright awful, as he was the second male boot on both the Duel 2 and the Gauntlet 3, but he came back to be a different beast on Cutthroat and Rivals 1 a few years later, holding his own against the best of the best, being in a decent enough position politically, and winning both seasons regarding the eliminations and the delays. Unfortunately, he came back for All-Stars, where he was met at best on All-Stars 2 and the first male boot on All-Stars 3, so he had a down, then up, and down again trajectory, and he's one of the prime examples as to why All-Stars can hurt some people's reputations. At 38th is Dunbar Merrill. A part of me is shocked that he is this high on the list, especially compared to how other people would rank him, but he's someone who is just mid overall, so him being in the middle of the rankings kind of just makes sense. He made it to the endgame on a lot of his seasons, like the Island, Battle of the Exes 2, and the Ruins, and he made it relatively deep on the Duel 2 as well. If I mentioned the Ruins, he made it to the endgame on the Ruins as well. And he did win Cutthroat, though everyone sees it as kind of a weak win, and his elimination record really isn't good, where he's almost just a bit better than Josh in my opinion, but I think he's a bit more skilled than Josh. But he ended his career on Rivals 2 on a bad note, with being the first boot. At 37th is Adam Larson. He's definitely someone who has been inconsistent, but may be stabilizing for the better. His first season on Battle of the Seasons 1 had him being one of the last people booted, but it was still early in the season due to the weird format of that season. He was one of the stronger figures on Gauntlet 1, where he ran the team politically and was one of their best performers, which got him the win that season. And then he ended up being the first boot on the Gauntlet 2 due to being the leader who had to go into elimination. He came back after 18 years and held his own very well in a modern season without knowing much people on All-Stars 4, but his Cutthroat move caused him to be purged right before the final. And it's interesting that this is happening right as All-Stars 5 is airing, so he could either move up or move down, depending on how that season goes for him. At 36th is Shane Landrum. This is the highest I could put someone who has never made it to a final. He has had strong showings in all but one of his seasons during his first run in the Inferno 1, where he made it pretty deep on Fresh Meat 1, both Battle of the Sexes, technically. After being gone for literally a decade, Shane came back a completely different person and was more strategic. He had a close call on Invasion of the Champions and made it far on Final Reckoning, where he had the Lavender Ladies Alliance. He is very consistent overall with making it far on most of his seasons and can win eliminations, and it's interesting to see how he will do on All-Stars 5, which would be 6 years after his last season. At 35th is Yes Duffy. Everyone knows I don't give the first 4 seasons much credit, though he did well on the Challenge 2000. He was out-strategized on Battle of the Seasons 1, earning a first boot despite performing well in that daily, and then he genuinely performed poorly on Battle of the X's 1. It took him 20 years to return, where he was the sole winner of All-Stars 1, despite him not really having any alliance, and he was booted mid-season on All-Stars 3 because he wanted to play with integrity and all that, which just didn't jive with the house. But he did have a good season on World Championship, where he made it to the endgame. He is a prime example of someone who has aged well with the times and format, but the strategic element is definitely lacking with him. At 34th is Turbo Kamrikan. Turbo is known for winning his first season as a rookie, and was very dominant on that season from a physical standpoint, where he kind of let Nanny handle all the political and social stuff. His following seasons were not impressive, since he got himself DQ'd on War of the Worlds 2 due to his temper, where he made it kind of deep on that season, but not deep enough, clearly, and he was out second on Ride or Dies because of his abhorrent social game. Holding onto his accomplishments on one season isn't enough for me to have him higher, but it'll be interesting to see how All-Stars 5 affects him on this ranking. So we're going to go through a few Era 4 people here, and at 33rd I have Paulie Calafiore. He benefited immensely from the janky redemption twist on Final Reckoning, but it did get him to his first final, but I don't give it too much weight due to the jankiness of it all. Paulie had strong showings politically and competitively on both War of the Worlds season, where he had a lot of alliances, he took out a lot of the OGs, and definitely made a path for himself and his allies, where they essentially ran both seasons, though he always just fell short of the victory, getting purged right before the final on World Wars 1 and losing the final on World Wars 2. His return after his hiatus has been severely disappointing, as he got 2 first boots on USA 2 and Battle of the Ares. He is very inconsistent and is on a downward slope due to his poor elimination record. At 32nd is Horacio Gutierrez. He had a strong rookie season on Ride or Dies, tying the most amount of elimination wins in a season, though you could poke holes in 3 of them, and he made it to the final on that season. His following season showed hole in his politics, despite being in an advantageous position in the beginning, but due to his lack of social and political game, especially the political, he had to fight to get to the end game on that season, and he was booted early on Battle of the Eras. Horacio has the physicality, but he lacks in the other elements, mainly the social and the political, and it seems like his career is going to be done with 3 seasons. So here's where he ends up. At 31st is Josh Mooney. I see Josh very similarly as I see Horacio, but he has a smaller averse regarding politics and the social game, and is more open to doing that. But despite that, I do feel like he's kind of just a follower in that element in general. He started strong on Vendettas, but was booted mid-season due to the Mercenaries twist, and we call him being in the majority alliance on that season. Josh made it to the final smoothly on Final Reckoning, winning a few eliminations and getting to the end without needing any of the jankiness that season had in general, being there from the beginning and the end, and he made it to the end game on War of the Worlds 2, being a part of the majority alliance and being one of the strongest members of that team. But he overall has the same strengths, weaknesses, and seasons as the person right below him, but I just think he's a bit better. At 30th is Nelson Thomas. Honestly, Nelson being this high is kind of shocking, especially since he's not good politically and is a mixed bag socially on some seasons, though it does seem like he improved on both elements as his career was closing, essentially. He had a few early boots like Rivals 3, Double Agent, and World Championship, and only made it to 2 finals out of 9 to 10 seasons, with Invasion of the Champions, where he almost won, and Spies, Lies, and Allies, where he did become more safer as a player compared to the Young Buck days. He did get close on seasons like Final Reckoning, Vendettas, and Total Madness, so that kind of boosted him up a bit. Nelson had a few close calls in the endgame, like I just mentioned, and he does have a good elimination record, despite his flaws that are present here. At 29th is MJ Garrett. He is a 2-time winner from 2 different eras and formats, which is impressive, but something in general is lacking, and I think it's because when you look at those wins, there's always some faultiness with it. Gauntlet 2 is due to the janky format and the final, and All-Stars 2, there's a lot of controversy with that final specifically. So he did win a few eliminations to get to the endgame on Duel 2, so that kind of helped him out here. And his All-Stars 3 game was okay. But the only poor season that he really had was the Gauntlet 3, where he came in as a replacement and only lasted a few rounds. But just looking at everything, not a whole lot stands out about him individually, and he's a prime example of a solid player, but the individual moments and stats aren't really there. At 28th is Rogan O'Connor. It's crazy that he was able to make it this high despite only doing 3 seasons within a 2-year time frame and being immediately purged on vendettas, not even making it to the main house. War of the Worlds 2 is a pretty strong season for him politically, as it caused him to escape elimination the entire season and to win. Total Madness was a hard enough season for him as he went into 2 eliminations where he had to prove himself, and he ended up in his second consecutive final. It will be interesting to see how he adapts on 41. At 27th is Nehemiah Clark. So his flagship run honestly isn't the most notable, as he was a mid-season boot on the Duel 1 and Rivals 2, with the Duel 2 genuinely just being a bad season for him where he was on the outs. The only strong season for him here is the Gauntlet 2, where he was in the majority Austin Alliance and won a few eliminations to get to the end, but his win is weak, which even he recognizes. All-Stars definitely benefit him, where he won several eliminations, and he was out right before the final on the first one, and got to the final in the following 2 seasons, where he was very out there on All-Stars 2, and he was intentionally under the radar on the 3rd season. And his grand return on Battle of the Eras to the flagship was just meh overall. He has a good elimination record. He took out some heavy hitters and has a handful of good seasons, but the high ceiling really just isn't there in comparison. At 26th is Devin Walker. So he is someone who's kind of all over the place, despite him not being really bad at all. His first season had him going to the final, but he was the first boot who came back due to all the DQs on Rivals 3. 30-30 was a genuinely awful season for him, where he was purged and eliminated in the first redemption, but he almost made it to the endgame on vendettas, and he was clearly not in the right headspace to do final reckoning. It seemed like he was starting to kind of turn it around on Double Agents, though he only made it past the mid-season point there, but he became a linchpin for the Vacation Alliance on Spice Lives and Allies and Ride or Dies, getting to the final on the former and winning the latter. He was booted mid-season on Battle of the Eras, and I don't know if he can really carry on the trajectory he gained from the last few seasons anymore. At 25th is Timmy Beggy. He's really the last of the set of OGs who primarily stuck to their eras to make it this high on the list, or as one of the last ones, but it's not high enough to me to make it in the top 20. He did really well on Battle of the Seasons 1, managing the craziness happening on the Road Rules team, and continued being a strong leader on the Inferno 1, where he won, and the Gauntlet 3, where he sadly had to take out Derek, who was on a winning streak. He probably would have made it to the final if it wasn't for that janky elimination in the Inferno 3, but he only did team seasons that are approaching, if not are already, 20 years old, and I could easily see him falling down on this list in a few years. At 24th is Mike Mizanin. Some might want to whoop me for this choice, but he's here for a lot of the same reason Timmy is. He's arguably the strongest player on Battle of the Seasons 1, which he won, and was a leader for the next few seasons, though he kind of went on a runner-up streak on the Gauntlet 1 and the Inferno 1 here. Battle of the Sexes 2 was a notably weak season for him, where the Veteran Alliance could only carry him halfway through the season, as he just wasn't in his best shape for the challenge, but he ended his career on a high note, winning the Inferno 2 and winning several Life Shielders on the season. He thrived in and only played in the OG era, which is 20 years old at this point, and I could see him dropping in a few years, just like Timmy, due to this. At 23rd is Frank Sweeney. During his short time on the show, Frank was very dominant as a competitor and a strategist, where he ran Battle of the Seasons 2, though some will throw in the fact that this cast is weaker in his face, and he definitely held his own on Rivals 2 with the veterans, causing him to get to 2 finals and winning the first one. He won 2 eliminations during his short time on Free Agents, but I could only put him so high with a limited career, but All-Stars will definitely be an interesting season to see where he will land. At 22nd is Theo Campbell. I do think my opinion on him dropped as an overall competitor, at least compared to his initial seasons. He was very dominant on War of the Worlds 1 when it came to the dailies, getting second overall, and did well in the eliminations on War of the Worlds 2, where he made it deep on that season despite being on the outs and just missing the endgame. Theo made another final on World Championship where he was more quieter there, and despite making it to the individual phase on Battle for a New Champion, he performed poorly in the dailies and got deep there but just missed the endgame yet again. At least he never has been booted early, but it'll be interesting to see how his next season contributes to his overall resume. At 21st is the other Theo in Theo Von. Out of the men who only mainly did the OG era, I do think he is the best, since we've at least seen him thrive on a dual season in Fresh Meat 1, though he just missed the final there, though he made it to the endgame. He was a strong leader and competitor all around on his other seasons, winning the Gauntlet 1 and Battle of the Sexes 2, where he was arguably the best competitor on those two seasons, and making it to the final on Battle of the Seasons 1. It's just that his game overall is very dated, hence it being 20 years old, but it's less dated than a Mike or a Timmy due to Fresh Meat mainly. And I could also see him dropping down in a few years due to this. At 20th is Abram Boise. Just making it to the top 20 makes sense for him. Abram is mainly known for thriving on the Inferno trilogy, which is where he got his wins, or runner-up, regarding the Infernos 1, 2, and 3, and Catch Thought was another strong season for him. But he does have his fair share of meh at best seasons, just from the top of my memory. That was the Gauntlet 1. Battle of the Sexes 2 was an outright poor season for him, and his latter seasons in Battle of the Bloodlines and Battle of the X's 2 were meh seasons. Compared to some of the other OGs that I just discussed, Abram did have longevity, as he did play in Era 2 and Era 3, but he didn't age the best with the duo format, hence his last two seasons, and he was never the best at strategy either, so that's why he's where he is. At 19th is Hunter Barfield. Hunter is someone who made it to the endgame on every single season he did. He was purged right before the final on his first two seasons, where he won many eliminations on Dirty 30. And this was during the time where the Young Bucks was kind of a thing. And he did win Final Reckoning, though I don't hold it or give it much weight because he debuted in the season midway, and of course he didn't win the money a la Sarah. War of the Worlds was another season where he made it to the final, where he was learning from West on how to handle the strategy, but he lacked endurance and his social game wasn't great that season. Hunter is really only good at the physical elements, and he competed in 4 seasons within a 2 to 3 year time span, but he's never been booted early, so I have to give him props for that. At 18th is Kyle Christie. As the most seasoned Era 4 male, Kyle found success on the show throughout the 7 seasons that he competed on. He made it to the final on Vendettas, for laying under the radar, Total Madness, and Spice, Lies, and Allies, getting the runner-up on the latter two, where he was in a solid alliance by then, and had a good sister game. And he was close to making it to the end on War of the Worlds 1, where he had his back against the wall and double agents, which was kind of the same as someone having his back against the wall. Kyle has never been booted early, though his earliest season was War of the Worlds 2, but his elimination record really isn't strong, and he can't shake off that untrustworthy label that has been put on him. At 17th is Kyland Young. For someone who only did 3 seasons to be this high, it shows how impressive Kyland is, though some could argue that this is a bit premature. He was holding his own on USA 1 with his powerful alliance before being a mid-season boot there, and he won several dailies and eliminations on Battle for a New Champion and Battle of the Eras against the best on that last season, getting to the endgame on both seasons, though his alliance making wasn't the best, especially on Battle for a New Champion, and he was kind of just there on Battle of the Eras when it came to the allegiances. At 16th is Alton Williams. So Alton thrived in the team's era of Eras 1 and 2, with winning many dailies and eliminations and getting to the final on his first 2 seasons, winning the Gauntlet 2 and losing the Inferno 3 and the Gauntlet 1. But he couldn't adapt well to the changing times and format on Battle of the Seasons 2, which is a team season but a much smaller team season. And while he did make it to the final on All Stars 1, which was an individual season, his performance skills did decline. It wasn't a competitive or political season, and he's never been strong in the political element either. And I think the main difference between him and Landon is that Landon thrived in different formats, despite Alton technically having a bit more longevity. At 15th is Leroy Garrett. So he's a prime example of someone who is solid to good and nothing else pertaining his career. Leroy didn't take it seriously for most of his career, especially after making it to the final on his first season on Rivals 1, causing for a few dismal seasons, initially like Battle of the X's 1, and then later on Battle of the Bloodlines and Rivals 3. But he did have solid seasons there, like Free Agents was a decent season for him. I guess somewhat Rivals 2, but obviously Battle of the X's 2 being arguably his peak season, especially with the first half of his career. And I guess Vendettas, he made it to the final there, despite never winning a daily. Things did turn around for him for the better on War of the Worlds 2 and Double Agents, where he took it a lot more seriously. He didn't have bananas there, and he had to get more involved in the politics, hence him making it to 3 consecutive finals, which also includes All Stars 4. But that kind of went out the window with Battle of the Eras. Leroy does have a good elimination record and usually makes it far on the seasons, but the winner skill set just really isn't there. At 14th is Faisal Shafat. Faisal has made it far on every season he has done, outside of his DQ on Spies, Lies, and Allies, making it to the endgame because he's good at dailies and eliminations. But despite making it to 3 finals, he has gotten last in all of them, which is a huge flaw of his in my opinion, which shows that he's not good at finals, and even his elimination wins are mainly physical. And we did see him get a bit sloppy when it came to the politics, especially on Double Agents, and then he found himself on the bottom of Ride or Dies, though he handled things well on USA 2 when it came to all sides of the house. At 13th is Corey Wharton. So he initially had a good track record when it came to his first few seasons, with making it to the final on Battle of the Bloodlines and Invasion of the Champion, though he was on the minority in that side, but kind of got in with the Young Bucks. But things turned around for him in the negative, even though technically he was messy on Rivals 3 too. After the Young Bucks was formed, he was targeted very early on both Dirty 30 and Vendettas, because he made it known that he was targeting the big time vets, with the addition of only being there for a few days on Final Reckoning. But he did get it together and made it to the finals or endgames from Total Madness onwards, relatively consistently, where he made it there, Double Agents, USA 2, and just missed the final on Battle of the Eras. I do think Corey has improved exponentially, but there are still some social holes, and I don't know if he has the skill sets to win a season, since while he did improve in the mental element on Eras, it's still nowhere near as good as it should be. At 12th is Zach Nichols. Due to his size, everyone expected Zach to be a GOAT, especially after winning his first season. But his temper and stubbornness cost him a few opportunities, which we saw on Rivals 2 and Final Reckoning being his most notable, and his elimination record really isn't great. But he made it to the final in half of his seasons, which obviously includes Battle of the Seasons 2, Free Agents, Vendettas, and War of the Worlds 2, and he made it close to the end game on Battle of the X's 2. But he also has some poor seasons like Invasion of the Champions, War of the Worlds 1. I might be missing another one, but whatever. And also, he should have been a multiple-time winner due to getting screwed over in Vendettas. But, like I've mentioned earlier, his temper kind of gets the best of him. At 11th is Landon Lueck. I'm pretty sure that he's lower on my list than a lot of the others, but based on my criteria that I have established, this really shouldn't be surprising. Landon did win 3 seasons, and his non-winning game in the Duel 2 is arguably his best season. But when you look at some of those wins, the Gauntlet 2 was very janky. I don't even recall him partaking in that final. And the Inferno 2 was a team season, but he held his own there. though he got a bit more involved politically with Fresh Meats too, so he kind of adapted there. He is great in eliminations, dailies, and has a perfect finals to wins record/ratio. I could only put him so high since he only did 4 seasons 15 to 20 years ago, and he avoids politics, where the show has gotten more political than anything in the years since he's competed. At 10th is Derek Kosinski. So, Derek was a groomsman for his first few seasons, which included Battle of the Sexes 2, which was an early boot, making it roughly around the end on the Inferno 2 and the Gauntlet 2, before going on a winning streak from Inferno 3 to Ruins, which also included the win of the island in between that time period. Derek would not be cast consistently afterwards, though he was close to winning Dirty 30. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that he was booted close to the end on Cutthroats 2, where he got second on Dirty 30, which was an individual season, which definitely helps him. Since returning on All-Stars, his journey has been rough. Since he made it to the final on All-Stars 1, there was a pouring showing in that final. He was booted the earliest he's ever been booted on All-Stars 2, and he just missed the final on All-Stars 3. And he had an interesting journey on Battle of the Eras. He has many good seasons, he has longevity and a strong elimination record, but the mental is not there to win a modern season, and his wins are team seasons. At 9th is Mark Long. So, the OG of OGs has managed to hold up well throughout the eras, years, and decades, making it to the end game in literally all but one season, being one of the best political players ever on the show. He could win eliminations when needed to, which we saw on the All-Star seasons, and it's the same with the dailies, which has always been something he's been consistent with throughout his time. The issue is that his 2 wins in Road Rules vs. Real World and Battle of the Sexes 1 are very dated formats, where the first was where no one went home, and the second had vote outs. And his willpower to win is very weak, since he has thrown at many seasons, most notably the Battle of the Sexes 2 and the Duel 1. And even his bad season Battle of the Eras is kind of questionable. And he also threw Battle of the X's 1, where he would have made it to the final otherwise. Also, his endurance is just very poor for a modern final, so that's kind of why he is this low on the top 10 overall. At 8th is Brad Fiorenza. I'm not the most sure of Brad's placement, as he could be moved a few spots lower. Him, Mark, and Derek are all kind of interchangeable for their own reasons. The thing with Brad is that he's been consistent throughout his career, from his debut season in Battle of the Sexes 2, just making it to the end game, where that continued throughout most of his seasons up until All-Stars 3, now that I'm really thinking about it. It's very rare for him to be booted early, with the exception of Battle of the Eras, and I guess All-Stars is one of his earlier season boots too. What can be held against him is that he only won once, which is considered a weak win on Cutthroat, though he got second many times, which we saw on both the Duel 1 and the Duel 2 and All-Stars 3 and the Gauntlet 3. And his elimination record is weakening due to his recent seasons, where I believe he has more losses than wins now, so that's kind of concerning. At 7th is Kenny Santucci. Kenny is someone who is seen as one of the best political players ever, and he's the only person who has done 8 seasons and made it to the final in every single season but one season, which is the Duel 1, where he was booted early. So in that record, he's very similar to Mark in that regard. In most of their seasons, they made it to the final. He could hold his own in eliminations and dailies, though he wasn't known as being one of the most physical players, and he won 3 seasons, which is the Inferno 3, The Island, and The Ruins, which are all team seasons, though he did do well on dual seasons like Fresh Meats 2 and Rivals 1. The one thing against him is his lack of longevity, especially compared to the top of the top at this point, since his seasons are 15 to 20 years old at this point. At 6th place is Evan Stuckman. So a lot of what I said about Kenny kind of applies to Evan as well. Though Evan also did less seasons, though within the same time span regarding the years as Kenny. What has him higher is that I do think he's better at the competitive portion of the game, and he was seen as a more outright leader in comparison, where Kenny was more social. Though he checked out on his final season, allegedly, Evan won an individual season, which is the Duel 2, though there's some questionable stuff with that, and he won the Ruins as well. But his lack of longevity is also why he is not higher compared to the top 5. At 5th place is Darrell Taylor. So he started the franchise on a hot streak, as he won his first 4 seasons, where all but 4 of them were team seasons, with the Gauntlet 1, the Inferno 1, the Duel 2, and Fresh Meats 2 being the Duel season. Though his performances afterwards on the flagship was disappointing, outside of arguably The Ruins, Invasion of the Champion, and Double Agents. The All-Star spin-off definitely bolstered him up, as he was the runner-up on the first 2 All-Stars seasons, though he had an early boot on All-Stars 3 and Battle of the Eras, and I believe he made it to the endgame on World Championship as well. Darrell has longevity and the elimination record, but he hasn't shown as strong of a performance in the individual phase of the show, and he always kind of avoids politics. He's not as avoidant as someone like a Landon or an Alton, but he tends to go under the radar, and on more modern seasons, that isn't good enough anymore. At 4th is Wes Bergman. He is someone who definitely has a lot of strong seasons, and he's the first man to ever win an individual season in the Duel 1. He was known as the Elimination King for a while, mainly due to his eliminations from Fresh Meat 1 and continuing that on his next few seasons. And while he can be good at politics, he also has some messy seasons that cause him to be booted early, like Battle of the Exes 1, Battle of the Seasons 2, War of the Worlds 2, Double Agents, etc. The issue with West is that while he has the longevity, he is too inconsistent and top-heavy at times. Despite having good seasons like Battle of the Exes 2, where he made it to the end game there, and also winning All-Stars 3, while having a good War of the Worlds 2, and some other good seasons where he made it to the end game. So I literally went back and forth about who would be in the top 3 for weeks at this point, and it's been a thing that I've seen in the online discussion recently regarding the top 3. But at 3rd, I do have CT, i.e. Christopher Tamburello. So there's arguments for all 3 of them at being at the very top. I ended up putting CT at 3rd since he has the weakest elimination record, which I believe is half and half compared to the other 2. He has self-sabotaged more, especially in the beginning of his career with seasons like the Inferno 3 and the Duel 2. And I do think that his wins are weaker in comparison to the other 2, though his wins are still strong, with his wins being on Rivals 2, War of the Worlds 2, Spies, Lies, and Allies, Double Agent, and Invasion of the Champion. Anyways, CT was a strong competitor from the very beginning, which we saw on Inferno 1 and Inferno 2. And he made it to the endgame on pretty much all the seasons that he didn't DQ in for the first 2 eras. After he was put on a hiatus, he got it together politically and socially, which we started to somewhat see on Rivals 1, and it continued with Battle of the Exes 1 and Rivals 2. And outside of a few random boots like War of the Worlds 1 and Total Madness, he performed better, where he got all of his wins within the last decade or so in Era 3 and Era 4, which is very interesting. So at 2nd place is Johnny DiVincenzo, or Johnny Bananas. He was number 1 for a long time on my draft, and I do see people still having him as number 1, which definitely makes sense. Outside of his rough first few seasons, mainly the Duel 1 and the Gauntlet 3, which were early beats for him, Bananas did pick up on the physical, political, and competitive elements of the show, which is why he was so successful from the island onward, and that didn't stop when his closest allies stopped appearing on the show via Evan and Kenny, where he won, obviously, the island, he won the Ruins, he won Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes 1. Free Agents is the other one that I'm missing too. His luck did start to run out after his 6th win with Rivals 3, where he got the Sarah curse, where he didn't make it to the final in several seasons after that, so he had some close showings, like Final Reckoning. I might be missing some others in that portion. Anyways, after being an early boot on both War of the World seasons, he won his final season at this point with Total Madness, where he mainly gets to the finals now but loses afterwards, which we saw on Ride or Die's USA 2 and Battle of the Eras. So he still has some longevity, he's adapted pretty well, and while he's not the biggest finals threat now, I would have put him at number 1 if he didn't have some of those early boots. At number 1 is Jordan Wisely. If this was the most influential or the most notable challenger list, he would not be at number 1, but based on him regarding as a competitor, he is definitely the best now. He made it to the final on his first season in Rivals 2, and the only 2 seasons where he didn't make it to the end game of was Free Agents, where he literally self-sabotaged himself there, and Total Madness, where the political and social game just wasn't there for him on that season, with All-Stars 3 being the only other season that he didn't make it to the final, though he got close on that season, and he had his back against the wall there. It means that most of the seasons that he has done, he has made it to the final, and he's won half of the seasons that he has competed on, where he won Battle of the Exes 2, he won Dirty 30, he won War of the Worlds 2, and he won Battle of the Eras, and he also won World Championship, while also having a good elimination record on him. As of right now, no one has as good of a track record as him, hence his placement here, and he still has the longevity as he's been doing this for pretty much a decade now, and he's seen as the biggest threat, and he's had to adapt his game to be more under the radar compared to his more boisterous years, where he still won during those boisterous times, but he's being more under the radar now, and Eras was the first season where he didn't have to go to an elimination, but he still won there. And this is my list on how I rank the men who did at least 3 seasons on the challenge from all 4 eras. What's interesting looking at this list is that I see a lot of greens on the left side, which means that's the lower side. So it really just shows how relatively weak era 2 is when it comes to the guys compared to literally every other era. Since at least with the era 1 men, it's a bit more balanced, and it's the same thing with the era 3 men, just from what I see. Though there's a lot more people on the right for era 4 men, so it shows that they on average are a bit stronger. So I did find that to be relatively interesting, and it shows that the top of the era 2 men and the top of the era 1 men are stronger than the era 3 and era 4 men outside of Jordan, so that might be due to them in general just on average having a bit more longevity. I'm not the most sure on that, but I do think it kind of makes sense, and I already know just from watching some of All Stars Rivals and looking at the 41 cast, I'm sure that this list is going to change a lot, so it's definitely going to be interesting to watch. Thank you all for watching, and I'll have more content soon. Bye!